sometimes the bridge we are called to walk may be a whole lot longer than the water beneath us, but we do not walk alone. I pray that you will know the steadiness of the bridge beneath your feet, and wherever you find yourselves on that bridge, I pray that you will hear God's whisper to you, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. There we are. Perfect. So friends, I first want to say thank you for inviting me to be amongst you today. It is a gift. And it was a gift, as was mentioned, as the first time I was in this building some months ago as one of the presenters. That was my very first experience of showcasing my art. And so I am grateful for the welcome I received then and the welcome I received today. The theme of the art series was peace, and I so appreciated that OAC would embark on such an important conversation. And now we have been asked to consider the theme of bridges. Like the art show, this was a new style of message preparation for me, as I am used to first looking to see what's the scripture passage for the day, and then listening to what emerges from the text. Instead, this time of listening, I was asking. But then I heard the words within my heart, "Be not afraid." Whether those words were to be my textual destination or my spiritual and emotional place of beginning, it felt like I was encouraged to proceed. So when Pastor Rhoda said the theme of this message series was bridges, my imagination immediately took me to the bridge in the city of Regina, Saskatchewan, where I grew up. The Albert Street Bridge. Next slide, please. There it is. Perfect. I'm not going to be very good at this part. When I Googled this bridge for images, another name came up instead. In my Googling, I learned that the bridge's official name is Albert Memorial Bridge. But I have never, ever heard it called anything other than the Albert Street Bridge. Why does everyone call it that? Well, it is the bridge we cross on Albert Street. Much like the Burrard Street Bridge or the Canby Street Bridge here in Vancouver. However, maybe they too have official names as well. And it wasn't just the bridge that came to mind, but the story of the bridge. It is a lovely bridge, but the thing that gives the Albert Memorial Bridge its claim to fame is that it is reported to be the longest bridge over the shortest span of water. A bridge that stretches 840 feet long, yet spans across a body of water that is approximately 3 feet wide. It is a bridge that is 837 feet longer than the water itself. This might then lead to a bigger question, perhaps. Why such a long bridge over a short span of water? And my friends, the answer is, I have no idea. It was part of a larger relief project during the Great Depression and was opened in 1930. So with an artistic design in the Egyptian Revival Art Deco style, construction may have been considered an important source of income and inspiration for those during such a time of great hardship. However, in turn, it was ridiculed by the locals for the cost of construction. And those sentiments of both awe and scorn still live on today. And yet, when I return to that small section of water and look at the bridge in my mind, it doesn't seem to be that way at all. I can imagine driving across the bridge and seeing the water as I look out each side. Do I notice the sections where the bridge is built over land? It seems I have to work harder to remember the bridge over land sections, and yet I can see the water quite clearly. With eyes facing forward, we may miss the bridge, spanning only that which is necessary to cross the water underneath. It could be that a bridge is a bridge, and our somatic, our bodily responses to bridge driving or bridge walking don't usually consider these objective facts. Our instinctual response is to keep moving across the bridge safely until we reach solid land again. So if you are on the Albert Street Bridge, you may not even consider that you are on land for most of the journey. Indeed, the time we need to put extra trust in the bridge building, that the bridge that is holding us up above the water, is very short. So I wonder if we've become so trusting of the bridge, or have we even forgotten that we are on a bridge? And I'm going to try this. Next slide, please. And yet, there are 3 parts to the journey across a bridge. The land where we begin, the time over the water, and the land where we arrive. And it isn't all the same. If we could cast our eyes each way, we would see that the view is very different. And our perspective from which we view the bridge is very different too. Are we looking forward to the other side of the bridge, or are we looking back to where we came from? Or are we right in the middle, seeing things from a very different perspective? Just as was mentioned today. The middle can be the scariest or the most exhilarating, depending on your experiences of bridges or the view it offers of the water beneath. And most importantly, we need to consider the direction we are going. A simple question, perhaps, but a comment of, it's on the other side of the bridge, needs the extra bit of contextual information of which side of the bridge are we to begin. And what about the water? A bridge is a bridge, yes, but the water beneath is not the same. Sometimes it's rushing. Sometimes it's more of a creek crossing. Sometimes it's very deep but very calm. And sometimes there isn't any water left under the bridge at all. And the water we were called to focus on today features not bridges, but boats. This was to be a quiet evening that had been set aside for the disciples to go on ahead while Jesus went up to the mountain to pray. However, though Jesus may not have been having that quiet evening, the disciples were not. The boats far out on the lake were being tossed by the waves and the wind. One commentator described it as tormented by the waves. And Jesus wasn't there to help them. What a feeling that would have been. Both the experience of the tormenting waves and the physiological response of feeling alone with no one to hear the cry for help. Next slide, please. And then shortly before dawn, we read that Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw this, they were terrified. Can you imagine that moment? Probably more than a bit shaken up after a night on the water, along with inner chaos and lack of sleep. Dwelling under a sky that still is mostly dark, with only glimpses of the new day's light breaking through, and someone or something is walking towards you on the water. I am curious what our first response would be. "It's a ghost," the disciples cried out in fear. And this sounds about right for such an experience. In such a moment, they did not, and probably could not, recognize the one whom they'd considered to be their leader and their friend. And it seemed that Jesus understood this. He did not ridicule them for not recognizing him or for thinking him to be a ghost. He did not get frustrated with them that they didn't acknowledge his miraculous act of walking on water. No, he spoke directly into their hearts, minds, and nervous systems. "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." What gentle power in those words. Words that bring courage, words that would once again bring recognition, and words that remind them into wholeness again that they are not alone. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Can you feel yourselves settle a little deeper into who and whose you are? And this might have been the moment for the disciples to take a breather. Looking into the face of love and feeling themselves getting settled again. But Peter, being Peter, has no time for that. And his response has got me a little bit baffled. "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus responded, "Come." Never would I ever have imagined that to be the response of one who has just seen someone walk across the water. There are many responses I could think for such a sight, but not, "If it's really you, tell me to come to you." Why would Peter ask Jesus to tell him to walk to him? Was it Peter's hope that the power of God was so strong in himself that he could walk across the water? Was it the hope that the power in Jesus was so strong that just being near him would be enough to bring Peter safely to Jesus? Or was the first test of Jesus' identity to be in how he responded to Peter's request? And that is my wonder. Can you imagine anyone else inviting us to walk across the water in full confidence that it could actually be done? I can imagine many baiting us to try to walk across the water. I could imagine the many who would warn us not to try to walk across the water. No one else would encourage such an act of faith or such an act of risk. Jesus said, "Come," and Peter did. Well, sort of. He began to walk towards Jesus, then saw the wind and got afraid and began to sink. Now, can you imagine that moment? You set out in full confidence and faith, eyes facing forward, and then you begin to look around. Then your thoughts begin to take on a different tone. Then you see more of the obstacles than the path. Then you start to listen to what others might think of this plan, and the sinking begins. Then Jesus reached out his hand and caught him from sinking, caught him from doubting, caught him from drowning, caught him and brought Peter to him. And now, in my estimation, this would have been a good moment for a hug. But instead, it seemed that Jesus just looked Peter in the eye and said, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" Not cool, Jesus, is what I want to say to that. Jesus would have known the impossibility of such a supernatural task for Peter. Even though it was Peter who asked Jesus to ask Peter to come to him, it feels almost cruel to suggest a thing. To suggest that only if your faith were great enough, then the act of walking across water would be possible. Or to suggest to those in the midst of hardship or illness or suffering that if only their faith was strong enough, then they would be made well. That's a bit. Somehow this doesn't seem like the God that we would want to be aligned with. But it is the very act of Jesus holding out his hand to catch Peter that reminds us that it is not ourselves but God who makes things possible. And yet I still don't think that we are being called to walk across the water in that way. I don't think we are being expected to try to accomplish such a supernaturally impossible task. Something only that Jesus could do. However, we are still called to walk across the water, but that is what a bridge is for. Next slide, please. A bridge to get us across the tormenting waves so that it will not be consumed. A bridge to keep us high above so that we do not sink. A bridge that makes the impossible possible. And the place where we can walk out to Jesus at his summon to come. And you may think, well, that makes it so much easier. We don't even need faith for that when there's a bridge. But friends, sometimes I think walking across the bridge might feel even harder than walking across the water. There is so much going on in the world that makes it hard to step out into the bridge. We tend to want to stay in places that are comfortable, that are known, and that don't make us need to change. And being on the bridge can be lonely sometimes because it can feel like you just can't find your people. The bridge can feel new and never familiar. The bridge can be a place that never feels quite like home. And sometimes the very act of crossing the bridge can take you farther away from your comfort zones. You have gone farther than you have ever imagined, and now not quite sure you could take another step. But just like Peter and those other disciples on that tormented boat, remaining at the edge of the bridge won't be comfortable either. We want to get out, but we don't know how. We know there is a longing for something more. And sometimes there can be a sense of stuckness where ways of being and thinking and interacting just don't work anymore. And to remain makes it seem like it's just getting worse. But what if Jesus now stands with us on the bridge? What if, as we gaze out, we begin to see someone or something that looks very familiar, and we hear the words, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." What if in walking across the bridge we meet the face of Jesus in those we encounter? What if we find people totally different, and yet just like us who are looking for a new way forward, where peace, courage, and beauty dwell? Next slide, please. So friends, I do believe that the bridge is the place where we encounter the kingdom of God. I do believe that it is where we can begin to live into the already, but not yet. I do think it opens our eyes to see more clearly, even if still dimly. And I do believe that it is the place where the hope and the promise of the resurrection begins to feel possible. So, my friends, I ask you, what would that be like to ask Jesus to ask us to come to Him? What would that be like for us to take those steps of faith, knowing that there is still ground because of the bridge beneath us? And what might it be that you need the faith of walking across the water in your life right now? Thanks be to God, we are being asked to walk across the bridge, not the water. But as I said before, that doesn't necessarily make it any easier. Indeed, sometimes the bridge we are called to walk may be a whole lot longer than the water beneath us. But we do not walk alone. Next slide, please. And so, my friends, my new friends, I pray. I pray that you will know the one who invites us all to come. I pray that you will know the steadiness of the bridge beneath your feet. I pray that you will know the one who built the bridge. And wherever you find yourselves on that bridge, I pray that you will hear God's whisper to you. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Amen.